Last November, I sent out 1,746 applications for different kinds of tech roles to see whether there's a bias in terms of gender when it comes to hiring. There's a screenshot that floats around the internet that suggests there's a 650% advantage for women when it comes to getting the first call back for an interview. But there's no evidence attached to it whatsoever. Another thing that made me do the experiment is that I feel like there's a lot of career coaches right now out there that give you contradicting advice when it comes to how should you structure your CV, what kind of past experience do you need, what kind of things should you put on the CV, and so on and so forth, without any real empirical data to back this up on, right? So I was asking myself, why doesn't this data exist yet? Why isn't there any real world data where people just applied to different roles with different kind of CVs and then saw which CVs did better and which CVs did worse? So I sent out 2 applications each to 873 different developer roles, one male, one female, with slightly randomized past job experience, different tech skills, also different designs. The whole experiment led to a dataset that might be the first of its kind, showing what really works when you apply to a real job and what doesn't work. In this video, we'll look at 4 different insights that I pulled from the dataset, looking at gender, past job experience, the look of your CV, and also companies that might make your future employer cautious about your salary expectations. The first point, gender, which was the whole reason why I started this experiment. And the answer to that, potentially underwhelming, but actually a positive thing, is we couldn't find a statistically significant relationship between gender and response rate in applications. Meaning, in our sample, there was an advantage for women, but the differences are not large enough to say, oh, in a whole population, we can be reasonably sure that women usually have it easier when applying to tech roles. So starting from the statement of women have a 650% higher response rate to we're not even sure whether your gender has an influence is quite the result. So on to number 2, which is styling does not actually matter. You yourself might have spent hours rearranging your CV, thinking about the font hierarchy, thinking about where to put your job experience, where to put your skills, where to put your languages or whatever. And I also had to do something similar so that it wouldn't be obvious the same person was sending the same application twice. So I had to create a template 1 and a template 2. And I personally like template 1 quite a lot better because it seemed a lot cleaner and not as cluttered as template 2. When you look at the response rate though, they're very, very close. Template 1 had slightly more responses, 133, template 2 had 128, but that difference is so negligible that it's probably down to chance. So what I did was, when I generated the CVs, I pulled from 11 different jobs from different companies with different job descriptions to randomly generate those CVs. And the companies were quite different. So on one hand, I would have very large companies and also famous companies, at least in Europe, like Spotify and Klarna. While on the other hand, I had very, very small companies, even ranging to saying, oh, I was freelancing for some time. Looking at the response rate, and response rate here includes direct interview invites, but also requests for more information, like what is your salary expectation, would you be willing to relocate, do you speak the local language, and more, Klarna seems to be the best company to have on your CV. And that advantage is also statistically significant, meaning we can probably infer that on the general population. We can make the assumption this holds for everything, not just for our sample. On the other hand, there are small companies that might even hurt your chances at getting a job. So one company called Unumbox, I'm not sure whether I pronounce it right, which is a small web agency somewhere in the UK, has a statistically significant negative influence. Obviously, it's still comparing against the other 10 companies, so it's relatively worse, but it's still remarkable that the difference is so large so that it's statistically significant. The second best company to have worked for after Klarna is, unsurprisingly, Spotify. But that's actually only the case if you look at positive responses overall. If you only look at the direct interview invites, it looks very differently, which leads me to finding number 4. companies assume you might be too expensive, at least based on your past jobs. So when I first looked at the data and I immediately looked at the direct invites to interviews, I saw that having Spotify on your CV might actually lower your chances at getting an invitation to an interview, which seemed very surprising. That's more of a 20% difference. You're 20% worse off if you want to get directly invited to an interview if you'd worked for Spotify before. However, the whole picture changes if you then include requests for more information, and staggeringly so. Candidates that had Spotify on their CV were 80% more likely to be asked additional information, which usually means we're going to ask you for your salary requirements. So if you put all that data together, people who work for Spotify are about 20% less likely to get a direct interview invite, but 22% more likely to get an overall positive response, meaning either an interview or a request for more information, which usually means the company is generally interested, but just wants to make sure that they're not wasting your or their time. If you don't believe me about all of this, I put the dataset now on Kaggle. I put the link in the description if you want to check that out and play with the data yourself. But one thing I do want to say at the end of this is that since I did the project all by myself, sending out almost 2,000 applications obviously took a huge amount of time. And in terms of data, it might still not be enough to prove different relationships or different correlations and things like that. But it might also just be the case that there is no relationship when it comes to gender, or there is no bias. And very often in data analysis or data science, no result is the result. And in this case here, that's a pretty big takeaway, because how this whole thing started was somebody typed something weird up on Reddit and it makes its way around the internet. And by now, at least I am perfectly sure that whoever this was full of shit.